Joining us now from Capitol Hill is Democratic Congressman from Minnesota, Keith Ellison. Congressman Ellison, it's great to have you on the program. There is much to discuss. I want to begin with the latest from the Supreme Court, the thinking that they may strike down parts of the Voting Rights Act and effectively kick it back to Congress. As a member of Congress, we know that in 2006, the House reauthorized the Voting Rights Act 390 to 33, the Senate 98 to 0. That's pretty bipartisan, but given the way things are on Capitol Hill these days, where do you land in terms of optimism about a renewal of the Voting Rights Act?
Well, Alex, we don't have any choice but to be optimistic, to reach out to people in a bipartisan way, to say, look, all Americans should be able to vote. Politicize the vote. The vote should be something that all Americans get, and political parties should contend with people, with voters, to win them to their side, not eliminate them from the opportunity to vote. So I don't want to predict gloom and doom. I want to say that the Supreme Court is going to look at the 15,000 pages Congress generated and all the hearings that it had and say, look, I guess the Democratic body is in the best position to make a decision here. And then if we end up having to deal with it over here in Congress, I'm looking forward to working with Republican friends to do the right thing.
Congressman, let me just open this up to our panel for a moment. David Corn, there are many disturbing things that are coming out of the Supreme Court today, but this idea of racial entitlement that we discussed at the beginning of the show would seem to be of a piece with the broader narrative of makers versus takers, and a way of vilifying minorities and saying they're just they want more than they deserve.
They need special treatment.
Yeah.
And the fact that Scalia, when he used that phrase, there's a presumption of racial entitlement, he tied it to the fact that the Senate voted 98 to nothing in favor of renewing this, the Voter Rights Act just a few years ago. And what he's saying is these people, these senators, 98, Republican and Democrat, have been so cowed by racial political correctness that Justice Scalia have to rush in and do something about this. It's not judicial activism, it's judicial megalomania. And you have Justice Roberts, who 3 decades ago, when he was in the Reagan administration as a young lawyer, he wrote briefs against the Voter Rights Act. So I think there's a real move here afoot to finally do this. While you said earlier, this is really separate from the ongoing discussion we've had in this country in the last year over what to do about voting.
Look, just one question, and I'm sorry to play devil's advocate. And by the way, I would probably expand Section 5 to cover the whole country, because I think it would probably just be an easier way to deal with this. But the flip side of this is, at what point do you say progress has been made and the world has changed?
Well,
and clearly, by the way, the world has not changed enough to be.
But hold on. That we're talking about.
But the flip side, the constitutionality point is there's sadly gerrymandering going on all over this country, and there's problems with voting for minorities in states way beyond these 9. And so therefore, how do you think about that? And that's what this is really all about from a constitutionality perspective.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I think there is something to that. But I do, and I'm sorry, I don't mean.
No, go ahead.
No, but I do think that, as you say, it is going on elsewhere, and therefore it is hard once you start sort of winding things back. We saw it last year in this election with what happened in Ohio, for instance. There was a huge debate over early voting, which the Romney supporters made a huge push. It was essentially distorted in their legal case against it to make it sound as if African American voters were getting something that they weren't entitled to. Military voters were getting something taken away. The latter part was absolutely not true, and it was essentially the same for everybody before that. So I agree with you. On the one hand, there is a point where you have to say, when do we start and when can we look at things differently? I don't know that this is necessary.
I would also say once you use the phrase racial entitlement, that takes it into a totally different realm. And Representative Ellison, I want to bring you back in here. Politico has a great analysis of what's going on at the Supreme Court vis-a-vis whether it's good or bad for the Republican Party. And they write, the courts move more slowly, and the key issues that electrified the Republican base over the past few years are only now about to go before the justices, though they're precisely the kinds of issues that many in the GOP are eager to put behind them. We are talking about, I don't think shellacking is an appropriate enough phrase, a drubbing that the party saw at the polls among young female voters and minority voters. And now you have a conservative court that could potentially dismantle a landmark civil rights case in advance of taking up the issue of gay marriage, which is not a good issue for the Republicans either.
Well, politically, I don't think it's good for the Republicans for this case to go forward and to see Section 5 struck down. I think that it would simply reinforce the idea that they're not a party of everybody, that they're a party for an exclusive few. And I don't think that helps. I mean, if you listen to Governor Jindal, he's saying we should expand this thing, not restrict this thing and limit other people. But I wanted to also comment about the folks who say, well, how long is long enough? I mean, but it's important to remember that the Voting Rights Act has provisions for jurisdictions to get out if they can demonstrate that they should not be in. But, I mean, if any city, Calera and Shelby County, should stay in, I mean, these people, they're in this court case because they excluded minority voters. So, I mean, it's actually kind of a weird case to be coming forward to talk about getting rid of Section 5.
Representative Ellison, if you can hang with us, we have to take a short break, and we're going to talk about